howdy all, grab yourself a beer, it's time for some Path of Exile discussion. Patch 3.17.2 went live today with a number of changes we were expecting, such as the patch to the Black Zenith unique gloves, and also a number of changes that we were not expecting, such as some changes to how Eldritch Chaos Orbs function. We'll get to those in a sec, but I wanted to go through the big feature changes that were added in this, and then go through some of the line-by-line little changes. So firstly, the biggest feature change that was added was the Fragment affinity for various Eldritch invitations. This is Maven's invitation, such as Maven's invitation the Atlas, Maven's invitation the Feared, and also Eldritch invitations, such as the key to fight the Black Star, or the key to fight the Eater of Worlds. So these invitations now are treated as fragments for the purposes of Stash Tab affinity, which applies to all players, and also for the purposes of the Fragment tab. They're now treated as fragments, and they have their own dedicated sub-tab where you can roll them and store them once they're rolled, until you meet the prerequisites to fight them in the case of Maven's invitations, or in the case of Eldritch invitations, until you feel like doing a bunch of them back to back to back. This, broadly speaking, is a change that I'm pretty happy with. I think I would have put them in the map tab myself, but the Fragment tab does work for them. It's fundamentally, it is a functional place for it, and it is far better than where it was before. The second change that's significant is a number of overhauls to the way that the Infinite Hunger boss fight works. Now, instead of the debuff providing negative 400 to armor and evasion per stack, and this is something that could stack up a lot in that fight, it is now instead minus 1% physical damage reduction and minus 1% chance to evade per stack. Broadly speaking, this is going to make characters that rely indirectly upon their armor and evasion function in that fight much better. So for instance, if you have the Ghost Dance Peystone passive on the passive tree, then Ghost Dance causes you to regain 3%, an amount of energy shield equal to 3% of your evasion rating when you hit. If you have 50,000 evasion rating, this is going to replenish 1500 energy shield when you hit. But if the Infinite Hunger had stripped that away down to 8,000, then your Ghost Dance really didn't work much at all. You'd only be getting 240 per Ghost Shroud expended. Nowadays, you will still get the full benefit of your Ghost Dance here. The other thing that's more significant than Ghost Dance here is Molten Shell. Molten Shell gains a tremendous improvement from this, and Molten Shell goes from not working at all in this fight to being a fantastic defense against the Infinite Hunger. Additionally, Corrosive Hunger stacks are now lost when the Infinite Hunger does his teleport you to the Stomach Domain realm skill. There's a couple of little changes, such as a change to the interaction between the Incendiary Archnemesis modifier and the Unique Ring Black Flame. But probably the next significant thing that comes up here is the atlaspassives chat command. So this details all of the atlas passive points you are missing. So if there's a particular Maven's invitation that gives atlaspassives that you haven't done, then this will provide you a notification to that effect. Definitely something that will be a good thing to see. Advanced mod descriptions is finally a default. This should have been a change made 2 years ago, but better that it happens in 2022 than not at all. Advanced mod descriptions is the thing that causes holding Alt when you're hovering over an item to work. So you hold Alt and then that will show you all of the details of the item. Previously, you needed to turn this on in the options, and even then you still needed to hold Alt. So it was just ridiculously clunky. They then changed it later so that the default was that it was on. So, new accounts it would be on for. But now it's just, there's no ability to turn this thing off, which is good because it was never a drawback to have it there. You just didn't hold Alt when you didn't want to see that extra information. Bows in Standard. This is a standard player change only, but if you have a bow that is an elemental bow that's a legacy bow, so one that was created before 3.17 went live, and it has flat added cold, added lightning, added chaos, or added fire damage on it, you can improve those considerably with a Divine Orb, and you should do that if you're in Standard. There's a big improvement to the Vaal Omnitect and Atziri fight here. This is something that I think will be very much appreciated, that minions will no longer work the way that they have been on those, where they target the boss even during the phases where you have to kill a whole bunch of minions, and if you don't kill those minions, then the boss heals. So that's being fixed. Number of other little changes here, but the big one in this section is the change to the functionality of Eldritch Chaos Orbs. This was completely unexpected, And that's because GGG never really went into detail as to how the Eldritch currencies were intended to work. And he sort of left this as something for players to discover. And what we discovered was not what GGG presumably intended. So when you applied an Eldritch Chaos Orb to an item, and here I'm going to assume that it is set up in a way so that it is reforging the prefixes on the item. If you applied an Eldritch Chaos Orb to a 2 prefix 2 suffix item, you would always receive back a 2 prefix 2 suffix item. You would never have a 3 suffix 1 prefix item, nor would you get a 3 prefix 3 suffix item or 3 prefixes and 2 suffixes. It would always be 2 and 2. Now, players believe this to be the intended behavior. Apparently it wasn't. Apparently the intended behavior was that it just functioned exactly the same way as prefixes cannot be changed, followed by a regular Chaos Orb. So that's the intended behavior apparently on an Eldritch Chaos Orb, and is how they're going to work in the future. What does this mean for crafters? I think for people that have a sort of 10 Exalt budget for an item, this is probably going to hurt you a little bit, but not all that much. I should just add in here that if you're crafting on a lower budget than that, this is probably not going to affect you at all, because you couldn't do all that much with Eldritch Chaos Orbs on a very low budget. And if you're crafting on a higher budget, you will probably still continue using Harvest. Fundamentally, you're probably going to want to use Eldritch Exalted Orbs and Annulment Orbs more, and Eldritch Chaos Orbs less as a result of this change. Eldritch Chaos Orbs were very, very, very good. Now they've gone from very, very, very good to just very good. Eldritch Exalted Orbs and Eldritch Annuls were probably in between those two levels, and so they are now feeling a little bit better than they were before. I am somewhat surprised that this was not mentioned, GGG didn't mention the intentions of the Eldritch Chaos Orb, and fundamentally that's the issue. We all thought that it was intended to work the way that it did, where it preserved prefix numbers and suffix numbers when it was used. So, in terms of the other changes, there's the already mentioned changes to Black Zenith and the fix that is going to break Winter Orb totem builds that people sort of knew was already coming. Next, there was a major bug fix to Drox the Warlord's Glove Cascade skill. So Drox the Warlord has a few skills that you are meant to dodge at all costs when you're fighting him. You'll know the Weight of Law slam that he has. That is a skill that is meant to be a one-shot. This skill kills you. Glove Cascade is not that. Glove Cascade is the one that you pretty much are meant to be hit by, but maybe not too many times. You're generally meant to endure this skill. It's where there's a whole bunch of little gloves that come down from the sky and donk you on the head. This skill was dealing damage equal to the damage of the slam in the context of Maven's Invitation, the Elderslayers. So Maven's Invitation, the Elderslayers will now still remain a very hard fight, but it will not be more difficult than intended, and it will not be as unfair as it was before, where you were getting one-shot by something that you were not meant to be one-shot by. In terms of other changes that are being made here, there's a couple of really obscure things, like a specific elevated sextant modifier that was not working properly and was only having 3 uses instead of 15. A single Searing Exarch implicit that wasn't working. Of all the things that you would get, you got exactly 1 tier of that implicit that wasn't working. Then something that I think is going to annoy a lot of players. So, Eldritch Orbs of Annulment, Chaos Orbs, and Exalted Orbs, Eldritch Exalted Orbs, can be used, unlike a lot of other currency, on items that have sockets that are full. This is just one of those quality of life things most of the time. There is one corner case, and this is the reason that in general you can't use currency that modifies mods on an item when the item's sockets are not empty. There is a very rare situation where an item can have a suffix modifier that says the item has an abyssal socket. This is mostly caused by the use of hollow fossils, which are a rare consumable that sometimes come up in Delve. So when you apply a hollow fossil to an item, essentially it functions like a Chaos Orb, but one of the suffixes is already set, and that suffix is this item contains an abyss socket. When an item has an abyss socket, this takes up one of the normal socket spots, and therefore the increasing or decreasing the number of abyss sockets on an item scrambles all the gem links on it. You can see where the problem is. What happens if you use an Eldritch Orb of Annulment or an Eldritch Chaos Orb and remove that mod from an item, but the item has gems in it? Well, that corner case is the reason that we have now all lost the ability to apply Eldritch Orbs of Annulment, Eldritch Chaos Orbs, and Eldritch Exalted Orbs to items that have sockets, that have gems in them. I would much prefer that GGG took a different approach here and make it so that none of these currency orbs can be applied to an item that has an abyss socket in it. I think that that would solve all of the problems here. You'd also need to make it so that hollow fossils, make it so that those cannot be applied to items that have non-empty sockets. But otherwise, I think they should just allow crafting on items that have got sockets filled in them, or at least make a menu option that we can turn on to allow it where possible, because it's just something that's frustrating. You know, every time you want to go and make a minor change to an item, you have to remove all the gems, then make the changes, then put the item back on. It's just frustrating, and I would rather that was changed. But that said, the corner case does exist, and therefore this change is sort of needed in some way. There's a little bug with Megalomaniac where 3 different mods couldn't exist on it. Didn't come up very often, but that's a slight change there. And probably one of the more significant ones, this was not intended. The maximum resistance modifiers for shields were unable to be changed to a different type of resistance through harvest crafting options. This is actually pretty significant in conjunction with the newly added, I'm trying to think of the name, Melding of the Flesh, I think it's called. One of the new boss uniques that causes all of your maximum resistances to be equal to the highest one, or at least, let's be more precise, to all of your maximum resistances to functionally be equal to your highest maximum resist. With that dual in play, it would have been quite useful to be able to swap these resistance modifiers around. That's now being fixed so that it can work. A number of other really tiny things that will not affect many players at all, but probably the one that is most significant is preventing others from using your map portals, which are a couple of little options that you've got to prevent scams. They didn't apply to map portals in the Karui Shores, they only applied in your hideout. That has been fixed. Anyway, that's 3.17.2, and it's already live, so you can play around with it straight away. May Vaal Orbs have interesting results, and I will see you in game.